Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Carrie Oderman with UATV. U.S. President Donald Trump and his Polish counterpart Andrzej Duda have signed a declaration to increase the number of U.S. troops stationed on Polish soil. The deployment of 4,500 U.S. military personnel and potentially 1,000 more was announced. The two presidents also discussed measures to hinder the implementation of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project. To discuss this and a lot more, we're joined in the studio today by Andreas Umland, political scientist and historian. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to start out talking about Fort Trump, and we're going to end up talking about Fort Trump, if I'm allowed to make a prediction. Let's talk about how President Trump moving military personnel outside of Germany to Poland could tie into the Nord Stream 2 project.
Well, I don't see a direct connection between both of that, but this is obviously a reflection of the anti-Trump mood in Germany and the pro-American mood in Poland. Also, the sort of special position that Poland has within the European Union. I think maybe the reasons for this sort of move may not be the best ones, but the effects may be indeed good for Eastern Europe and for Europe as a whole, because countries like Poland, they feel insecure in light of the recent developments. And it may be also perhaps good to have the troops in a country that really welcomes these troops. Whereas in Germany, indeed, we have this strange situation that Germany is one of the countries that has most benefited from U.S. protection over the last 50 years. But there is still a lot of anti-Americanism in Germany.
Could be a good mood from Duda also, because even though Trump says that Poland will have to carry most of the infrastructure costs for new bases, that means in the long run a lot more money for local economy.
Yes, and I think it will be for, if these troops move from Germany to Poland, the Germans will actually feel the effect, or these localities, the municipalities that will lose this income. So it makes sense, and I'm generally supportive of that. It will make the whole sort of East European region more secure, and it will also allow Poland to be in the international sphere more self-confident, and I think indirectly Ukraine will benefit from that.
Okay, it's not a surprise when I say Trump is maybe sending mixed messages here, because most of his reign in office has been about mixed messages. Yeah. By maybe not taking the Russian threat seriously in Ukraine, however, moving troops to Poland, what is he saying about the geopolitical situation?
Yes, this is indeed an enigma also for me, that in his last conversation with President Zelensky, he said that Zelensky should solve the issue about the Donbas himself with Putin, and that was a very strange sign, frankly. And then he makes this announcement in favor of Poland. So this is an unclear picture, and it's very difficult to decipher what is actually the strategy behind that.
Right now, I believe it's about 30% of Germany's gas is coming from Russia. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline was going to make this supply secure. Maybe you could explain briefly to our viewers why the U.S. is against Nord Stream 2.
Well, I think it's very obvious. There are two reasons. First, the current behavior of, and that is, I think, the main issue actually, of Russia towards Ukraine is also determined by the still remaining partial dependence of Russia on the Ukrainian gas transportation system. And this has been lowered already, this dependence, with the Nord Stream 1 pipeline that went online in 2012, and 2 years later we had the war in Ukraine. If now a second line will be opened, then this dependence will disappear, and then Russia will be independent in its actions towards Ukraine and not any longer depend on the gas transportation system. The second reason is that Ukraine is going to lose in this whole deal, because Ukraine has now income from this transportation, and therefore this is also an economic problem for Ukraine. And this whole project is actually unnecessary, because there is enough transportation infrastructure already not underwater, but in Poland, in Slovakia, in Ukraine, and in Belarus to transport enough gas to Western Europe, and therefore this whole project looks as a geopolitical and not geo-economic project.
Merkel and Putin have never had a very good relationship. Macron is warming up to him, but Nord Stream still managed to happen. How will Nord Stream be stopped if it's going to be stopped? What kind of mechanisms are in place to prevent it from happening?
Well, this is difficult to say because there's now also some resistance within the EU, even within Germany. For instance, the Green Party is against this project. And for me, it's frankly difficult to say what leverage the US has here. The US is, of course, a big economy, cannot really stop at this point this project. This would also lead to a German-American row. The German industry, the German representatives of the German, especially energy companies, they, of course, they want this project to happen. A lot of money has been already put into this project. I hope that still Nord Stream 2 will be stopped, whether by the EU or by Denmark or by the US, because this is a dangerous project. The risks are simply too high.
Well, let's switch the topic to someone else I know that would like Nord Stream 2 stopped, President Volodymyr Zelensky. I started out by saying we were going to talk about Fort Trump. That was Andrzej Duda knowing how to speak to Donald Trump. Now, President Zelensky has been criticized a little bit in the media for also knowing how to use words that Donald Trump will react to. In the transcripts from the call, it seemed like President Zelensky knew exactly what President Trump wanted to hear. What does that say? What's the reaction here in the Ukraine?
Well, the suspicion now in Ukraine is that Zelensky has gone too far in his sort of following the line of Trump in this conversation and sort of agreeing with Trump that the EU is not doing enough for Ukraine. I think the EU leaders will understand actually this sort of play that Zelensky is playing here, and that the repercussions will not be as bad as many here in Ukraine now suspect, because indeed Zelensky was sort of in a way disrespectful towards Germany and France and the EU. But I hope that the German diplomats and EU politicians, they will understand that this was, of course, a conversation that was geared towards the kind of narratives that Trump likes to spread.
Now, you posted on social media that Ukraine being in the news isn't necessarily a bad thing. Do you want to expand on that?
Well, when I'm in Germany, and I'm not so sure about the US, but in Germany, certainly the main problem of Ukraine is simply its absence on the mental maps of the people. Of simple people, of ordinary politicians. Of course, there are experts, diplomats, and certain interested politicians who know a lot about Ukraine. But from this sort of somewhat cynical point of view, I would say that almost any news about Ukraine is good news, because it simply puts Ukraine in the minds of the people, and they start associating Ukraine with certain things, even if these things are sometimes not entirely positive. But the more present Ukraine is, the better. I think also that this whole visit of Zelensky to the US, the scandal, then this strange conversation he had, the strange press conference he had with Trump is good as a sort of a flow heater, a stress test, a crash course for Zelensky and his team, who are now getting very deep into world politics, and they are now part of an impeachment process in the US. And that is also good that this is happening at the beginning of President Zelensky's term, so he already gets fully into the kind of problems that he will be encountering the next 5 years.
Let's talk about that. Zelensky's popularity rating is over 70%. There's really nowhere to go but down from there. You mentioned a stress test. How do you think they performed? He has a very young team. He's new to politics. What could he have done better?
Well, I think the record is ambivalent. A number of reforms have been are speeding up, and this is certainly good. But there were already after the election of Zelensky as president, before the elections for the parliament, there were also worrisome signs, like, for instance, the idea to have illustration of the former members of the Poroshenko governments and administration, and then the G7 ambassadors came immediately out with a protest concerning this idea. And there have been now in the recent weeks some similar signs that worry people in the West. The IMF delegation has now left Ukraine without any visible results so far of the negotiations. That's difficult to interpret. I still hope that there will be a success in these negotiations. So we will see how this will develop. This is certainly for these young people who have now taken over in Ukraine a very tense and stressful time. And they have to sort of find a middle way between effective government and democratic rule, and not to and be effective on the one side, but also not to lose the support from the West, from civil society in their reform of Ukraine.
Ukraine has done a lot to keep things transparent in some of the reforms that they've put through. Is there anything else that they can do in the short term in light of the current scandal that they've been wrapped in, this administration has been wrapped up into? Any parting advice you'd like to give?
Well, I mean, this is very obvious, but one has to say that obviously Ukraine should keep out of U.S. domestic affairs, and they should always emphasize neutrality, and but that they know that themselves. And this is now a very strange and I would even say bizarre situation that suddenly Zelensky and a whole number of other Ukrainian activists, like for instance Serhiy Leshchenko, are sort of becoming part of these domestic games within the U.S. They can only sort of present the facts and try to be as honest and as forward-coming as possible. And then after a while, I think things will clarify. And my prediction would be that Ukraine will actually come out well of this.
Well, we hope Ukraine does come out ahead on this. And yes, to summarize, stay honest and repeat the facts and keep it to domestic politics. That was Andreas Umland, political science and historian. Thank you for watching Head to Head, and stay tuned for more with UATV.